Good afternoon. It is 2:30 on a Friday, and this is All Things Advocacy with AARP North Dakota. State Director Josh Aspig. With me, as always, is our Associate State Director Janelle Mose. How are you?
Good. Another Friday. We're
Another
2
Friday.
weeks away
Two
from
weeks-
crossover.
2 weeks away from crossover. As you can tell, the countdown to crossover is on. Before I do that, hopefully you enjoyed our new intro, and I just want to give a shout out to our intern, Haley. Haley's been interning with us for almost a year now, and it did a great job putting it together. Appreciate Haley as part of it. So you're starting the countdown to crossover, which means it's getting to be very long days at the Capitol.
Yeah.
I didn't get a chance to be up there at all this week, as you well know. So talk to us a little bit about what happened this week. What's going on?
You know, we had a couple of surprises. So the first surprise was the insulin bill, or Senate Bill 2140. We had anticipated that bill was not going to pass in the Senate, but as with anything, you never can know exactly what's going to happen until the very last minute. So Senate Bill 2140 actually did pass. It was amended. So originally it would have it would have capped insulin at $25 for all insurance plans, as well as the supplies that go along with that. But they've narrowed the focus of the bill. It's only focused on PERS. So very similar to the bill that we had in front of the Senate as well. But it did pass. So it came out as a do not pass recommendation in the committee, and it passed on the Senate floor. So that is good news for folks that are, really insulin dependent, and we know how much insulin costs and how that's a pocketbook issue for folks. And it's now will be up in front of the Senate next week in appropriations for consideration.
So Senate Bill 2140, I just want to back up just a little bit. I know you explained this, but just to make sure everybody understands it. So Senate Bill 2140 is one we had testified in support of earlier this session. Yes. As part of it. So this does not actually get at the pricing of prescription drugs. So it is different from 2031 in terms of it does put a cap on insulin-based products and insulin. Correct. As part of it. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that cap would be $25. Mm-hmm. Is that correct? Okay. Mm-hmm. And does it still, even with the amendments, and I know you've been tracking this very closely this week, even with the amendments, apply to just the insulin itself, or does it apply to the other diabetic products as well?
The other diabetic products as well. Okay. And the other thing they really want to look into this issue a little bit deeply. So they did attach language in there that they'll study the issue, and PERS is required to study the issue during the interim. And if they see cost savings, they're required to put forth a bill that would then expand that coverage beyond just PERS. So it would be all public and group health insurance plans. So this is a significant step. Again, we testified in support of it, mm-hmm. but we knew we wanted broader change related to prescription drugs. But this is a step forward for many people that struggle to cover the cost of their insulin.
Absolutely. It's a good bill. And as I retweeted earlier this week on an article about it, Senate Bill 2140 is a good step. However, the legislature should do something more broadly about all prescription drugs and drug costs and pricing specifically as part of it. So this is where it gets interesting. So, and I think it's worth spending just a couple minutes explaining the process here. So when a bill comes out of a committee with a do not pass recommendation, even if there's a fiscal note, it goes to the Senate vote for a floor vote. Yep. So it passed the Senate floor. So in a normal course of events, that means the bill is going over to the House for consideration. However, because of that do not pass recommendation, the process is a little bit different in this instance. Do you want to outline that? And before you do that, might explain to folks, when a bill gets introduced, it gets sent to a committee. When the committee hears it, they can take 3 actions. They can technically take 4 actions. They can amend the bill. And then if they amend the bill, they can take one of 3 other actions. And they don't have to amend the bill, so they can either give it a do pass recommendation, which is they're recommending to their colleagues that this is a good bill, this is something that needs to be moved forward and kept alive. A do not pass recommendation, which means we've looked at this, even with the changes, if there's changes or whatnot, we just don't think this is worth moving forward. Or there is very few instances where there's no committee recommendation, where the committee just can't decide on what to recommend as part of it. So the importance of the committee process is if that do not pass recommendation is on there, even if there's money attached, it generally goes to a straight floor vote, versus if it has a do pass recommendation and there's money attached, it has to get sent to a second committee. So this is an instance where the committee gave it a do not pass recommendation, even though it had money or a fiscal note, you might hear it called, attached. It went to the Senate floor, the Senate overturned the committee's recommendation. What happens now? And I know you touched on this, but just
Sure.
to help folks understand, it's not done in the Senate yet.
No, it's not done because it does have a fiscal note. It did get re-referred now back to appropriations. So the appropriations committee is going to look at it next week and really dig into the money piece of it. The policy committee has thoroughly vetted that piece of it. Now they're going to look at what is it going to cost the state if they were to, pass this bill in the Senate. So after the Senate the appropriations committee then decides to give it a do not pass or a do pass recommendation, it will go back to the Senate again. The full Senate then will get another attempt or another chance to vote on it as a whole Senate.
So I think it's important for folks to know Senate Bill 2140. We're going to talk about this later as well, but it's worth just saying now, you need to reach out to your senator if you want to see him take action on putting an out-of-pocket cap on insulin and diabetic products. Senate Bill 2140, make sure you email your senator, because even if they voted for it the first time, they're going to have to vote for it again to move it across as part of it. And I think there was quite a big cushion, if I remember, in terms of I don't remember what the final vote was, but I think it had over 30 votes.
It did. It had 34 yes votes. So they really are there. But again, the Senate has another opportunity. I think that's why we need to make sure that if this is important to you and family members, that we let senators know this is an important bill.
Absolutely. Let's move on. What else happened this week? You were tracking some pension stuff as well.
Yep, we've been waiting for a long time. There were two different pension bills. House Bill 1040, that is the one that was studied during the interim, is endorsed by the it's gotten the stamp of the interim committee. Leadership is behind this bill. It really looks at revamping the entire public employee retirement system. It moves away from that defined benefit to a defined contribution. It's got a lot of, what I would say legs in the House. I mean, there's a lot of support for this bill. And we were opposed to that bill along with a lot of other organizations that really see this as a slippery slope. We're obviously concerned about folks that are currently retired or, on the edge of retiring, making sure those benefits are there for that long term. That bill will be considered next week. The committee, it voted on and they gave it a due pass. And so now it will show up in House appropriations next week for them to look at the fiscal impact of it. On the flip side, on the Senate side, Senate Bill 2239 is the bill that we are supporting. And that bill looks at keeping those defined benefits intact. It does give an option for new employees to do a defined contribution plan if they choose to. That committee is the State and Local Governments Committee in the Senate, and they gave it a favorable recommendation yesterday. So now what happens to that bill now, because this is another little curve in the road, right? So because anything that has to do with the PERS or the Public Employee Pensions, that has to go to the Employee Benefits Committee now. So because it was amended, it'll have to go back to another committee that will give it either a favorable recommendation, unfavorable recommendation, or no recommendation at all. So then once that process is taken care of, then it's going to go back to Senate appropriations. So a lot of these bills get looked at several times, both from the policy side as well as the appropriation side. So we anticipate in the next 2 weeks, that's really going to be the number one topic that's going to be talked about in both the House and the Senate. And if both bills pass, we'll start this whole conversation over again in 2 weeks. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's the importance of having somebody up there every day, and why we have Janelle up there every day keeping track of this, because that process stuff at this point in the session becomes really important. And that process stuff is places where you can apply different parts of pressure or different tactics depending upon that. The other thing you had on the list for this week is re-referred appropriations bills or bills and appropriations. I think you've touched on a lot of that. Anything else you want to touch on in terms of bills that have been kind of sent over to appropriations that we're keeping track of?
They're still just looking at, finer points in each of the budgets. So the Health and Human Services budget, the Attorney General's budget, each, depending on which chamber it is, they can make decisions about what the governor, recommended in his budget, what the agency is asking for, and then they as legislators have their own. So it's a mix of all three of those that come together, and then they finally decide which bill they'll move forward in for either the whole Senate or the House to vote on. So those bills will continue to churn out. I think this morning you and I were talking. There's about 70 plus bills, appropriations bills, that just have to do with money that are sitting in both House and Senate appropriations still. So they've got really significant long days and a lot of hard conversations coming up in the next 2 weeks.
I think it's a good segue to next week. I think next week's going to be a lot of time on some of our funding priorities, our home and community-based services priorities, some additional enhancements for the Medicaid fraud unit and the Attorney General's budget. I know there's some housing stuff we've been watching that's got money tied to it, related to it. Anything else you want to talk about in terms of next week with appropriations?
No, it really just has to do with money at this point.
Yeah.
So, again, another opportunity to not vet the policy issue. I think the committees have gotten that work done, but now it's really to look at how much money is available. Where does the legislature want to prioritize in terms of, this first half, and then move it into the next part of the session.
And I think the key part about this point in the session is a lot of this, I shouldn't say sometimes, or shouldn't say it this way. A lot of times it's just posturing to make sure that there's room for negotiation in places, because once bills pass this part of the session, the whole process kind of goes back to square one in terms of the other chamber then gets their ability to put their imprint on appropriations bills or policy bills or these types of pieces of work as well. And so I don't want to say it doesn't matter, because it does matter, but I think on the money side, if you're wondering why we're not spending a lot more time on it, I think it's we're engaging where we need to engage. We're making sure we're sharing our priorities where they need to be shared. But right now, it's really just making sure that things are showing up where they need to show up, or not showing up where we don't want them to show up, in some very, very rare instances on the funding side of it. And that the second half is when those things really start to get hammered out and negotiated.
Yeah, I think I heard a House appropriation member call it this morning a placeholder.
There you go.
It's a starting point. So where they think they can start, and then knowing it's going to go over and get considered by the other chamber, and then they'll be able to make some decisions from there. But it's a placeholder, a place to start the conversation.
Absolutely. So with that, what do we want folks to take action on? I think I have my suspicions what you're going to tell them to take action on, but folks want to engage this week. What should they be talking to their senator or legislators about?
Yeah, Senate is where the action is right now. We really want to have you encourage your senator to support Senate Bill 2140, which is the insulin cap bill. Again, this was a significant win for supporters of making sure folks can afford their insulin. So reach out to your senator, let them know that it's important, that this is a good first step in terms of addressing that really population that's impacted by that high cost of insulin. So again, send an email, make a phone call. If you see them in district, a lot of them are doing in-district meetings right now, back in their home communities. So if you go there, have a conversation with them, tell them why it's important. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So just to give you all a sneak peek now, looking ahead, we'll be back next Friday, as always, and talking about what happens next week and things that happen. The week after that, it's likely, we're still finalizing all this, but I just want to give you a heads up. It's likely we won't be back the week after that, because we'll be getting ready for the legislative lowdown events that are on February 27th. So a reminder, we're doing legislative lowdowns, which is the crossover break of the legislative session. What's happened so far during the legislative session? There's still room in Minot, Grand Forks, in West Fargo. I know there's a wait list in Bismarck, but we'd still encourage you to register to get on that wait list, because if we have more space or an ability to get you in, we want to make sure we can do that. So again, encourage you to do that. So we'll definitely be back here next week. I'm looking forward to being back here next week, in part because I think Janelle will be so happy to be out of the Capitol after next week. Next week's going to be, I think, probably one of the longer weeks. These next 2 weeks get to be very, very long days in terms of it's a lot of waiting for action. And then when the action happens, it's very fast, and then it's waiting again as part of it. So anything else you want to add before we get out of here for the day?
No, I think we gave you the little nuggets that you need to know and go into your weekend, and look forward to next week. So
thanks for joining us. And this has been another All Things Advocacy.